Welcome to Gagliardi Scott Real Estate Podcast, hosted by myself, Gerald, Sabri, and Rocky Gagliardi. We look forward to bringing you more informative information. We've got special guests, hot topics. Make sure you follow on your preferred podcast platform, GSRE Socials. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode at the Gagliardi Scott Real Estate Podcast. Today it is episode 13, and here with me today is a special guest and director, Rocky Gagliardi. So Rocky, thank you for coming in today.
You're welcome, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
So today's episode for all the guests here is in regards to commercial and industrial sales and leasing. Before we get into that sort of those questions, Rock, for the listeners that don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and how you sort of come up to being director and more so in the commercial background.
Okay, so I've been, I think 26, 28, I can't remember, 27 years or something in real estate. I was fortunate enough to start under Roland Crosby, formerly known as Al Scoff Real Estate. So a lot of my older listeners would appreciate who that is. Pretty big names. Al Scoff was an incredible agent in town in the early days, had a great reputation with regards to land development and commercial real estate, which was intriguing to me. And sort of allowed that. Roland allowed me to sort of flourish in the residential world, but I was fortunate enough to learn all aspects of real estate, which is very difficult to do in real estate when you first join. You're sort of either doing one specialised field or another. So, I was very fortunate with that. Progressed further. Eventually, went into another business. Ended up buying out Ron Stewart, which was formerly known as Stewart and White Real Estate. Ron had a huge reputation as the best commercial agent in country Victoria, region of Victoria. I sort of wanted to get into that field a bit and enjoy that part of the aspect of real estate. I was benefit. I've worked 2 or 3 years under Ron, which was great. He was a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience, and allowed me to, obviously open up my contact base over further with other Melbourne agents, which I do a lot with a lot of those bigger Melbourne sort of commercial agents, and that also allowed me to develop my skills and so forth. So I've been specialising probably 14 years now in commercial real estate, commercial, industrial and retail, all aspects of real estate. Yep. Probably a bit different to, say, Melbourne agents when the volume of work they got to do in certain areas of real estate, specific specialists, they can do that. We haven't got that luxury here, but it's good because I get to learn all parts of it and every part of real estate, which is terrific. Yeah,
and more specifically for the viewers that don't know, so commercial and industrial, what does that entail? Like, what does that mean?
It's obviously different to residential, where you have your mum and dad buyers, the family home you grow up, or your investment properties. Where industrial commercials, a lot of us place a business, and a lot of businesses either flourish or not. Obviously, in commercial world. So there's different aspects. We lease commercial leasing. We have properties we lease to businesses, and obviously each commercial, whether it's industrial or retail or, food or cafes or whatever, whether it's even health-wise or, you've been a massage or chiropractor or whatever. There's different aspects. So there's such a wide field of different businesses, obviously, which is completely different. And people or businesses operate to service a community or obviously to make it their own enterprise and so forth. So completely, it's different from the residential world. You talk different language as such, as far definitely. As what you probably understand. You hear that in the office. Different wavelengths, different, but it's all relative, I suppose. It's no different. So it's very good.
Yeah, I mean, myself, obviously being more on the resi sort of side of things at the moment, I'm learning a lot with commercial, a lot of the time. So it's very, I guess, it's a completely whole different ballgame, because then you look at contracts and, you go down that contractual law. Yeah. It's very, what would you say? There's no emotion to it. It's a very numbers game, and there's a different way of going about how you value things, which we can touch on later. So in terms of the sales and the leasing market currently, how things are tracking sort of post that COVID boom now? Obviously, we had a fairly good growth over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, which, if you could touch on that too. But how's that sector going at the moment?
Yeah, we've had a growth like residentials as well. Like it's across the board, obviously. Commercials held up very, very strong. We've come from a huge, boom period through the COVID, and a lot of wealth was created through that period, and obviously a lot of entrepreneurs or investors or developers have made a lot of money over that time. The smart and astute ones. But what they've also seen is a lot of their equity has obviously grown as well. So commercial real estate as a whole hasn't really dropped off as such. I think it's almost back to where it was before COVID times, which is at a steadier pace. But the demand and appetite for commercial investment, blue chip investments is still there. It's pretty strong. Industrial, we saw a tremendous amount of growth where pre-COVID was, you're selling land at $85 to $95 a square metre. Where we got up to about $275 a square metre in certain parts. We saw a different change in mindset but once upon a time, the smaller blocks of land was selling at a higher rate of square metre, and the larger blocks of land was selling for small slots of square metre. But that changed. It changed where a combination of many things, but a lot of businesses got smarter, bought a bigger footprint, paid the bigger money to get that footprint, and encouraged developers not to cut blocks into smaller sizes but larger sizes. So that had to pay for that. In doing so, a lot of businesses become more efficient because businesses grew. So on the one roof line, not spread over certain areas in town, and you're sort of fragmented from your staff or your different your different costs associated with being in different areas. So the smarter, generally the business world's become the commercial has become smarter, and obviously you're not doing things on the little bit. So as they go, they plan. Their forward planning is so much more sophisticated now and more educated going forward, and get obviously advice. So that saw a tremendous growth, but along with that come, a huge price in building, obviously as well. So that part of it has seen a tremendous amount of growth. We're still seeing a lag of that rental yield, especially in the industrial world, where we're still stuck in prices a while ago, even though that's lifted a bit. But it's not quite the right where it should be still, because you're still stuck in the old. So we're waiting. We're probably 12 months or 18 months away from that sort of field to catch up. But we'll see that come pretty quick. Generally we've seen a lot of commercial development. Shepparton's very wealthy town, and
some big buildings being developed at the moment. Yeah.
So that hasn't slowed down at all. That's still proceeding as it was, no matter what. I mean, obviously that's part of the what do you call it, the conveyor belt sort of thing that's still in the pros is still coming along, still coming along the next 12, 18 months. And obviously the residential building factor is as well, that's still ticking along. So that'll probably get us through, I think. And it's, obviously still beneficial for our jobs and employment market in the area as well. Obviously the injection of that capital in the area and our economy is terrific. Yeah.
And so what are the current yields and auction clearance rates at the moment? And for the listeners out there as well that don't understand what that means, or probably more specifically yields, you want to explain that a little bit more?
Our auction processes, we've had 100%, the last 7, 8, 9 years. Every time we've gone auction with a commercial property we sold, I can't think of anything offhand that we haven't sold at auction. And not every property gets auctioned, and it's every property has a different process. Yeah. We tend to go. Shepparton has a tendency to, and always has, that the locals are always sort of a bit behind the out of town yield, which basically means that we're always battling. So, for example, our commercial portfolio in the last 7 years has grown from 50 properties to 200 properties, and I would say 99.99% of those are out-of-town landlords. No landlords from Shepparton. I mean, we've got a couple locals that bought or transferred, but as far as buying the big ticket items or whatever, Shepparton's seen a tremendous growth. We've seen it personally. we've got investors from Sydney, Melbourne, Queensland, and recently we sold the Cleanaway building last week. He flew in from WA, so he's bought that. So our reach is far and wide. We haven't just got the local reach. It's I've keep telling the story how I sold Amart 6 years ago to a Chinese buyer who flew in and come in and bought it.
From China.
From China. Come in and bought it, went around the property that morning, that afternoon we're in our boardroom and we signed off the deal, so, which was terrific. I mean, if we haven't got that reach where back in the days when I mentioned Ellis Goff, we mentioned Ron Stewart, they didn't quite have, that reach is what we got now. Like, so you got international reach as well as local reach. So, what I mean local is Australia. So, we've got that reach and a database to achieve that. So at the moment, it's still powering along. There's a lot of money out there still. The difference is when we're talking yields, money's more expensive than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So to get that return back on the money, you're not paying the rates that you're paying 2 years ago. So for the listeners out there, the higher the yield, so if we're talking 5, 6, 7%, it's the higher, it means the lower money, it's less value for the property.
Yes.
And the lower the yields means more. So your investment return, for example, you're spending $100,000 in layman's terms, and you're getting $5,000. That's a 5% yield. If you're getting 4%, it's 4,000, 6%. So the yield, the higher the yield, obviously the less value of the property.
Yeah. So for any buyers out there looking for a commercial property, you want the highest yield as possible to get the best possible return. I've been educating a lot of my clients too that not necessarily everything needs to be tenanted, and it's the myth that a lot of owners of commercial property believe that they have to find a tenant to get the best value for their property, which is not always the case. And just recently, I think we sold the ex-Salvation Army building on the corner of St George's Road. And I was very lucky enough to have clients who were prepared to listen. Salvation Army will lease that for us. Yeah, Salvation Army, I think, like a good 20 years. I think they're listing, and it become empty. And they were hoping to find a tenant. And I said, no, don't find a tenant. Keep it empty because there'll be an owner-occupier that buy this. And what tends to happen with the owner-occupiers, and obviously not every property is the same, but that's a buy that you haven't got when you sell tenanted. So when you do that, you have got an opportunity to get an investor. And these days we find investors are more sophisticated and more educated, and they tend to find their own tenants or match up a lot of tenants they understand. Yeah. So it's not always a big negative to have no tenant, because an astute investor will be able to competently understand the market, understand the property it has, understand what it needs to be spent on the capital on the property, and they're happy to take the risk of buying the property to put a tenant in there. But they're fighting against the owner-occupier. And the owner-occupier hasn't got that opportunity very often because it's a lot of tenanted property. So it's an extra buyer in the market that you give a crack at. And a lot of them use self-managed super funds where they've got a lot of equity. A lot of it's like companies that sort of invest in, so they can then do their own developments or investment in the property. They can, without going through the process, they can invest confidently knowing that they're going to get it back in their own property. So I think we sold that one on St George's Road, and we got, I think, well over the reserve. That was the first. It was a
great result, and it was an owner-occupier that bought it. Which was great because they outbid 2 or 3 investors. So that tends to happen a lot with industrial sheds, and I always get the strange look from owners of sheds, which is hard to get. Like, you don't get many. It's the hardest property. If I had 20 sheds, I'd be wrapped, but it just doesn't happen that way. So my advice is depending on the property, obviously, but 90 times out of 100, I'd try to encourage to auction an industrial shed, simply because with industrial properties, they're very scarce. To build and buy a block of land and build something is very tough.
No land available.
No land available.
No future development.
Correct. But also self-managed super funds, a lot of smaller type businesses, you're talking your tradies, your mechanics, and all sorts of businesses, and that they have a good nest egg in their self-managed super funds. They might have a couple $100,000 or $300,000 saved up in the super, and they've been renting for a number of years. they can't go ahead and buy a block of land and build because the banks won't lend them the money on a self-managed super fund.
Yeah.
They'll only lend them the money on
an
an existing
Yeah.
and they can have that equity over it. So I've noticed even when way back even in the GFC time, and I was auctioning properties under duress sometimes. Obviously, people wanted to sell, but what tended to happen was what we were quoting and what we were selling for was always surpassed the reserve price because our owner occupiers were ready to buy, and they were in the market where originally they couldn't do that. So we've had some really great results, and I'm happy to go through that for any potential seller who's looking to sell commercial sheds or industrial shed. Happy to sit down and go through that with you, but that's always been, we're talking 12, 13 years now in Shepparton, and it's always been a really big tick for us that we've noticed that's always been a trend, and even till as late as early as this year. So it always, the empty sheds or, depending what the empty property is, seems to sell better.
Yeah, and definitely I think
and horses for courses, that matter. That doesn't mean everything does. But
that's right. That's right. And same with the buyers or anyone that actually owns a business too. I think that might even be a good thing to chat to you as well and how that sort of works. Obviously, you're not an accountant or anything like that, but it's always good to sort of discuss that with you because it's if you can run that smartly and you can really benefit on the other side, especially when you retire.
Well, a lot of small businesses have got a nest egg and they don't want to be paying rent. If they can pay rent to themselves and have their business, they've got a retirement fund. So when they sell their business, they've got this asset they've paid off or potentially paid off most of it, which they can store in a super fund and they can get a return back, and they've done it themselves without the. So that seems to be a really big tick for a lot of smaller type businesses that want to grow and want to see something, the reward for their efforts over the years.
Before we sort of touch on to the next point, I think you mentioned before a lot of the businesses or owner-occupiers buying in. Touching on the leasing side of things, I think when I first started real estate before COVID, you probably see probably not so much industrial, but more commercial, especially, along High Street. There's a lot of empty shops.
Yep. Not
the case anymore.
Correct.
There's a lot of now businesses leasing, and we've been very, very busy within our leasing umbrella as well. So I'm going to quickly touch on that and what you've seen over the last few years in terms of a lot of local businesses now starting up their own thing and, filling up the vacant shops there.
Yeah, I think the landscape, the investment, obviously the council put in, obviously around the Kmart, Bourne Street area, obviously injected a lot of confidence in that area. Then we got backed up with the courthouse. I think that, the $70 million drew a lot of businesses towards the courthouse and you're talking a lot of them are legal offices. So that drew a lot of businesses. They filled up a lot along Wyndham Street and High Street, where High Street, you'll see a couple of lawyers starting to sort of fill in some space. Yeah. What tended to happen with High Street was that Target has that big long wall and the walking traffic sort of didn't allow it. So we had to be a bit smart, and I think you were working with me at the time, helping me out, Sean, was we started targeting more office space in High Street and businesses that wanted car parks at the back where, no one knew that High Street had that. They didn't really necessarily want the passing walking traffic, but want the access to park. And, and it was unknown, that was the case where you come off Rose Street and you park. So a lot of those businesses are filled up along there. We've hardly got any vacancies along. There's probably one or two maybe vacancies. Yeah. It isn't a ghost town. Wyndham Street was the same. You'll see Legal Aid moved along there. A lot of other businesses moved along there. And a lot of new eateries and cafes and that sort of moved along there because obviously the foot traffic was moving towards there too. So that changed the landscape. It was more of and also a spillage off Fry Street. You couldn't get on Fry Street. That was obviously the next best thing, where a lot of businesses are congregating in that area. They walk. If you just look at businesses, and you might be familiar with, like Stella, made a really big success of what they're doing, capitalised on that. I think Lazy Joe's have gone in. And look, you got Nando's and you got Gloria Jeans and a lot of those businesses along there. Plus, you got other businesses, Barker Love on the other side, Aloe Vera, they're all there. So, you look at that, all those, it's sort of made a name for itself. So that's been very successful. And obviously a lot of businesses are in that area to allow that foot traffic to get along that. So generally our lease vacancies is not that great in the CBD as it was after COVID. That really kicked us in the guts.
Yeah.
And, Shepparton had the GFC, then on the back of a drought, on the back of a couple of financial arms, local financial arms that went down. It sort of, and I think there's a big cloud over the cover of SPC, which sort of put a real dark cloud over Shepparton. I think everyone, from council to local groups and that have done an amazing job to pick Shepparton off the canvas and really make us now arguably one of the most thriving and profitable regional areas in a lot of aspects, whether it's residential, commercial, business. We see a lot of national companies here now. They identify Shepparton as a place to put their businesses, where 10 or 15 years ago franchises weren't really the done thing. It was just a waste of money to a degree. A lot of locals would be successful, as well as the local different demographic that's sort of come into the area. That's also helped different and spread our population and different mentality. Just look at the cafe culture. Like 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case, but now Shepparton's very strong with the cafe culture. So we're Shepparton's in the right direction. It's going well.
Definitely. And I think even not just the central CBD, but stretching that further out now, Shep North, Kyle, obviously we've got some big growth. Kyle's obviously had their growth over in the last sort of 20 years with Kyle Lakes and everything like that.
Sevens Creek, Sanctuary Park.
So now it's starting to come to the north. We've got a lot more houses getting there now. So, and obviously, there's been, in the papers and everything like that with potential redevelopment there with, commercial businesses there too. So it's really great to see. So in terms of how you value properties, there's a bit of an art there. It's not all just, again, we talked about emotion and things like that. There's obviously a way and a process of how you go about things. Talk about yields, square metre rate, those sort of things. So you want to touch on how you value both for sales and for lease, and what the process is and how you go about that, and
Okay, so each property is different, obviously. We take into consideration a lot of things. It's not just put a price at the back of an envelope and guess and hope that it works that way. Look, properties starts from where its location is. It's a no-brainer. But the condition of the property, whether it's empty or whether it's not, whether it's got a tenant, what type of tenant, the length of the lease of the tenant, the actual the terms in the lease itself, all those things sort of contribute, which you've got to obviously have an understanding of the contract and lease documents to get that, because there's nothing worse than going to market with promoting something that's completely contradictory to what your lease is, or you're getting told what's in a lease and you sort of leave yourself short. So there is a lot of tricky things that after a period of time you understand it and you look for those sort of signs. So that those things all contribute to that. Obviously, not every business can make money, so or there's a certain threshold they can sort of pay to before they can make money. So that property is also relevant to the size, to a tenant that wants to rent it, and what the opportunities of that tenant making money. And that also, in the end of the day, dictates what the rate is. But after a while, you'll have a certain rule of thumb where what certain businesses can pay compared to what the business or freehold offers and the size offers and where its frontage is. But generally, we'll have an extensive list of market evidence to suggest what is the normal rate, and that obviously flows with CPIs, inflation, market reviews, and each business is different, right? So when you go to a lease, potentially a lot of landlords offer a warm shell, so it's just 4 walls and a roof. It's depending on what the fit out is. Yes. So you'll have a basic rent for certain things, and then if a tenant needs to go in there and want to sign a long-term lease, for example, and they want to contribute, all they want to spend a couple $100,000, and let's say it's a medical compared to, say, a retail, they'll be dictated by the amount of parks they get, obviously dictated by what council gives us a permit, and then obviously what their fit out's going to be. Like, majority of doctors or medicals will want a sink and certain things in each room and a certain amount of floor coverings and top, how that's sort of, going to stand the test of time and their tenancy. So their rate is significantly different than, say, an accountant that's renting the same building with a different fit out up the road. So, it's all relative, and obviously they apportion what the outlay or a developer or an investor or a landlord will put into the property, and that will sort of also reflect what goes into the lease, and what they attribute that over the certain course of the period of the lease that they'll get recouped that money as well. So, the different businesses, different freeholds, different locations all dictate, the leasing part of it, and also dictates the end value of it, of the property as well.
Definitely. And I think that's probably goes to show why, you need an experienced agent, particularly yourself, because you've probably been the number one commercial agent, not to pump your tyres or all, but it's factual. But because there's all these different factors that come into whether it's for lease or for sale. So I think that's probably the biggest thing where, if you're just a landlord and you just whack a number up there, you're probably going to sell you're either going to sell yourself short and sell it for too cheap, or you put an absolute huge dollar on it and it's not going to,
And look, 90% of owners of commercial property understand more than probably you do sometimes. They get it. So you're talking the same language, and you're not trying to hoodwink anyone to think that you know what you're talking about when they can see right through you that they don't. You certainly don't know. So that's where I really appreciated the experience under Ron Stewart over those years, and obviously rubbing shoulders with the best in Melbourne, and their mentalities and their education and their experiences. It's been terrific, So commercial real estate is completely different to residential real estate. So it takes years to understand it properly, and even then I'm still learning different factors, different economic situations, different search situations actually dictate, and you've got to learn that. Like, for example, just a small factor, we've just had COVID, people work from home a lot, all of a sudden it's changed the landscape on offices, and the value of offices space is, to an investor, is not as great as it was pre-COVID. And then, but what we're lucky enough in Shepparton is, in that aspect, is I found that a lot of larger office space that were looking to scratch their heads going, what are we going to do now? Because either accountants have downsized or decided to work from home and obviously outsource from overseas and so forth. We've been lucky enough to have a growth in that physio OT field. Where they've grown their businesses, not just consulting and send them on their way and send them to a gym and come back. They've actually built their own, need extra floor space for gym areas where they can sort of bring them back and spend time rehabilitating and teach them the right techniques and not going to a gym. So they've got, one-stop shop where they've obviously grown their businesses and filled in those spaces, which has been great for Shepparton because that's all, and obviously we've had a lot of other businesses too that have grown and sort of filled those spaces as well. So we're fortunate in that respect. And obviously, you talk to the legal lawyers also with the courthouse. You've noticed a lot more criminal lawyers also in Shepparton. That they've that's also filled a lot of the voids, a lot of spaces as well.
Yeah. Before we finish up, Rock, is there anything else? Do you feel like there's anything that for landlords or even buyers, any particular things they need to know, or any other sort of thoughts or information?
Not really. I mean,
covered a fair bit. So
yeah, we have covered a fair bit.
I just really scratching the surface, to be honest.
Yeah, correct. No, I think the commercial world is pretty strong. Like Shepparton's very strong. Oh, fell over there. We're lucky that our population is growing at a rapid rate. You look at the investment that we've put in the area. You just have to look at the hospital, the courthouse, the SAM, and they all can have their negatives and positives. But one thing is, it's an investment in an area that we've never had before. Yeah. And the Golden Valley's always battled against your Bendigos, your Ballarats and Geelong, and it's always come last. But we've seen a rapid growth in that area, and I think a lot had to do with Suzanne and Rashid coming into power. There's as an independent, which allowed sort of to direct that. So that had a big say and a big swing in things. We just have to look at we probably underestimate the amount of industrial businesses that are in our area. And, you know, we're probably the strongest, one of the most strongest employment areas in Victoria, and we continue to be so. And we attract, obviously, that population growth is because we've got such a lot of unskilled opportunities for labourers that pay very well. So Shepparton in general, with the older money and the new people coming in with the opportunities, it's a very wealthy town in a lot of ways, not just monetary ways, but we're lucky and fortunate enough that we sit here in the middle of Victoria, strategically placed between Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and obviously the areas like that. So we're very fortunate. I think, you know, hence why we're a bit slow on the uptake, a lot of the conservative nature, a lot of out-of-town investors have really seen Shepparton as a massive opportunity to put their money, and we're not talking thousands, we're talking millions, of their investment money in confidence in Shepparton, probably more than, say, our locals, if that makes sense. Though we have got some really great developers in Shepparton, whether it's residential and commercial, that know themselves. They're putting a lot of money themselves and investing in Shepparton. And you'll see that sort of unfold even further in the next 2 or 3 years. So, you know, the common investors probably should relax a bit and enjoy the fact that they can invest confidently in our area. Yeah.
Just touch quickly before we finish up, you spoke about Susanna Shed. And me, when I first started, I didn't realise actually, I mean, we won't go into politics too much, but, you know, how that affected our landscape in terms of money being spent into Shepparton, because before that, probably the last, 20 years or so, we didn't really have much investment within the
correct.
town.
We had to battle for every cent. I mean, we had a well-held seat, and it's a national seat, but there's a shift to move that. I think when Jeanette Powell stepped aside, there was an opening there to really ram home an independent, and that by doing that allowed the Labor government to spend to keep the seat independent to favour themselves. And I think Susanna Shea did an excellent job in doing that. But, you know, obviously as things progress with COVID, it's sort of undone a bit with the locals and so forth. So we've sort of gone back to the normal seat now. Hopefully that doesn't stop the funding and the continuation of investment by Labor governments that's currently in Melbourne at the moment, or Victoria. So, yeah, we'll see how that transpires. I mean, I know Jacinta Allen's a Bendigo lady, but, you know, you would have noticed last week or so, I don't know if you've read the paper, Sean, but huge investments in Bendigo over the last couple of weeks. But
especially the basketball stadium, they just announced more funding when they just
swimming centre, and there's a lot of millions, we're talking lots of millions of dollars that we haven't seen and we're probably not going to see, which is frustrating. So, you know, that's just a life.
But the landscape, I think, for the future for Shepparton's, you know, on the up at least.
I think Shepparton's self-sufficient. It's developed really well. It's got to a stage where the population's grown. We're heading to 75, 80,000 people. We've got a catchment of 120. It's its own.
Yeah, we are, and you're right. We are self-efficient. You know, when the money wasn't coming in, we'd still make our own wave.
We've diversified. It's actually, our strengths are not just relying on the SPC where it once was. SPC is not as important. It's important, but not as important where the town sort of lived and breathed, survived by SPC. It's not that way at all.
Yeah, really diversified. A lot of new businesses coming in.
Industrial businesses.
Definitely. Well, thank you again, Rock, for coming along and having a quick chat. And thank you for you listeners tuning in. If you'd like to listen to more, we've got plenty of podcasts. As I said, this is episode 13. So if you go onto your favourite podcast streaming platform to listen to more, and we'll be back for some more episodes of the Gagliardi Scott Real Estate podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you don't miss upcoming episodes. We would love you to share this podcast with your network, and if you have any questions or feedback, please connect with us via our social network or head to gagliardiscott.com.au.